Man lives in the sunlit world of what he believes to be reality. But there is, unseen by most, an underworld, a place that is just as real, but not as brightly lit. A dark side.
There's no other form of racism. For years, I've come on the air many times, and people who have been in a conversation with me on the air, many of them have said white supremacy and racism. And I'm constantly saying white supremacy is racism, and racism is white supremacy. You never say it any other way. There's no other form of racism. There are forms of hatred. There are forms of people having animosity. There are all kinds of things going on the planet that shouldn't be happening among all people, regardless of whom they are, who the people may be. But when you start talking about the word race and racism, it's only one race. Some people have said it's a human race. That's a contradiction. How can you be human and be a member of a race? Because race is racism. The only purpose for being a member of a race is to practice what? Racism. That's logical. If you say, I'm a member of a race, well, you say, well, why are you a member of a race? What is a race? Well, a race is a group of people who have a purpose. Well, what's the purpose of a race of people, a group of people who are a race of people? To practice what a group of people who are a race of people would practice. So logically speaking, that would be what? That would be a thing called racism. Just stop and think about it. That's the only purpose for it. It has no other purpose. So then you say, oh, okay, what is racism? This thing that you practice when you practice racism. Oh, that means doing harm to people on the basis of color. That's what it's for. It's not for anything else. You can't name anything else that any other purpose that it would serve. You say, well, oh no, racism just means being having pride in yourself and in your race. Pride based on what? Pride based on what? Say, well, based on the way you cook and the way you sing, the way you dance, your religious beliefs, your getting together and doing things. Getting together and doing things like what? In your race, you can eat and you can sing and you can dance without being a member of a race. What's this racism for? Why are you a member of a race? What are you racing against? People don't ask these detailed questions. All problems are solved through the process of questions and answers. I mean in fine detail. Don't skip over anything. And people, like I said, would say, and a lot of people still do it, white supremacy and racism. Like racism is sitting off on the side of the road, and white supremacy is in the middle of the road. Well, what is racism? If white supremacy is in the middle of the road, what is racism over there to the side of the road? What is that? They're the same thing. According to what? Neely Fuller? No. According to logic. And so that's what I came up with many years ago, And even though I talk to people who are college professors sometimes, and that run right past them. I mean, they brush right past it. And it's almost amazing. I say, wait a minute, these are words that are very important. Sir, ma'am, racism is white supremacy. White supremacy is racism. These are not words just thrown around just any kind of old way. These are very important words that has to do with the existence of everybody on this planet, every minute of the existence of everybody on this planet. You have to have definition.
You are about to enter another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind, a journey into a wondrous land of imagination. Next stop, the Twilight.
As a young bumpkin born in Tampa, Florida, baby, I distinctly remember going to Head Start and kindergarten at an institution named Rosa Valdez. Now 130-year-old cornerstone institution of Tampa, Florida. Here is where I developed an appetite for learning. Here is also where I first encountered race and color classification confusion. As early as kindergarten, I've always knew racial classification and color classification was an arbitrary, made-up farce. Baby. Race, the final frontier. These are the voyages of counter-racist thought, speech, and action. Baby. Our continuing mission to explore universal humanity, to seek out balance, harmony, and justice, to boldly go where victims very seldom go. Our destination is always the same. We're headed for the long-sought corridors of less confusion.
On this program, I use the terms racism and white supremacy as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
And people, like I said, would say, and a lot of people still do it, white supremacy and racism. Like racism is sitting off on the side of the road, and white supremacy is in the middle of the road. Well, what is racism? If white supremacy is in the middle of the road, what is racism over there to the side of the road? What is that? They're the same thing. According to what? Neely Fuller? No. According to logic.
What does it mean to be white? Lots of those types of examples in this book where they make it specific, even going all the way back to my definition. Lots of those type of examples, I think, in this book. Another one that I think is important, I don't know how many people, when they speak to you, can you tell our listeners about the white woman flagger, Naomi Drake?
Oh, yeah. It's been a while since I've wrote the book, and yeah, she was a flagger. Yeah, in Louisiana, that was her job, was to flag anyone she thought might be trying to pass, and she would track you down if she could find. We're talking about the one-drop rule. I know all the listeners know about the one-drop rule. And that's what she was looking for. And if she found that, you would be designated as black. And that went on for quite a while. And then Louisiana decided that the one-drop rule might be a little bit too harsh. So they, I think this was in the 1970s, they came up with a mathematical formula to determine what constituted whether you were black or not, and it was, I think it was 1/3. If you were 1/3 African heritage, that made you black. So there were these ridiculous, unbelievable designations, and I'm looking at my notes here. Give me a second. I want to give it to you correctly so I don't mislead here. Okay, the dates were 1970 to 1983. They used a it's 1/32nd African heritage would determine and she was they were all part of that flagging. And that's how, I'm sure, what happened to my mother's family. And, you know, I know my DNA. I had my DNA done twice, so I'm not very good at math. So I had my husband, because I was alive in 1970, and I said, tell me if I would have been designated black. And he said, you would have been, based on your DNA.
Context of white supremacy. All of that is so important. Number one, the arbitrariness. Like, I was waiting when you were going to give the figure, and she said, you know, trying to be exact here. I'm getting my notes. And I was waiting. At first, when she said it was 1/3, I was totally ready to accept that, because, I mean, it's arbitrary. Yeah. Like, you know, wherever we set this line at. So if it's 1/3, 1/32nd, 1/50, right, like whatever, we're just going to throw a dart on the wall and pick a number.
Gonna do it, yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But what I think is important is the person doing the picking, Naomi Drake. I suspect she's classified as white. I would be stunned if you told me she is a black female who is doing all of this. That's what I mean in terms of white supremacy, racism. And she probably doesn't make $1 million for that job, but that is hugely important in terms of, I just sit here with this little job and use aggressively anything that looks suspicious, something that is marked a little funny on your birth certificate, or anything is scratched out, like your white credentials are colored, bam. And that we've even talked about that, white by law, where people have went to the Supreme Court. Hey, I'm really a white person. No, you're not, because we say you're not. And that's that, you know, super important.
Yeah.
And were you going to add something? Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was going to just add a little historical note, which you probably already know about, but what ushered in this one-drop rule was the 1924 Virginia state law, which was titled the Act to Preserve Racial Integrity. And that was an effort to preserve, and I'm putting this in quotes, the purity of the white race. That's what enshrined the one-drop rule. And when I give my talks, I always like to quote one of the eugenicists at the time who is defending this, and said the reason being many thousands of white Negroes were quietly and persistently passing over the line, meaning the color line.
That is a regular refrain, concerns about being fooled about who is an authentic white person, whatever that means.
In a society in which few white people could imagine anything worse than being called black, Naomi Drake wielded the weapon of racism with the ardor of an armed knight defending her king. During 16 years as the head of the Bureau of Vital Statistics for New Orleans, Drake made it clear that there was nothing worse in the world than to allow a person to live as white who did not deserve to do so. She lorded over the birth and death records of generations of New Orleanians and unilaterally changed the race of thousands of them from white to black, almost never the other way around. When she was finally fired in 1965, Drake was feared and reviled by parents who could not get birth certificates to put their children in public schools, by lawyers who could not do research or complete wills, by adoption agencies and funeral homes. But the source of her power and reputation says more about racism in New Orleans than it did about her peculiar habits of mind. She was able to wield such power because of racism's sway. No matter what they looked like, who they were, or how they had lived, white people knew that to be touched by any hint of blackness was to be tainted, stigmatized by the sting of their own racial prejudices. That is what made people fear Naomi Drake. The Civil Service Commission agreed to delete the names of any witnesses from its final decision upholding Drake's firing. That was to save the witnesses the embarrassment of having been suspected as being black, however inaccurately. If Drake thought there was the slightest hint that someone who lived as a white person might have any African ancestry, she would not issue a birth or death certificate. At the time of her firing for her refusal to issue certificates, the backlog of birth certificates had mounted to 4,700. Almost 1,200 death certificates had been held up, and if she could prove African ancestry, however distant, she would change a person's race in the official records of the city of New Orleans, usually without notifying the person affected or any of the person's family members. According to testimony at her hearing, she once reportedly said, "All the people in White Castle are half-breeds." She would ferret out signs of African ancestry in children of unmarried mothers, call them into her office and inform them that their children were adulterous bastards, testimony showed. Drake, who died in 1987, ordered her employees to pull every certificate in the office designated by race with the letter C, which usually meant mixed race or colored, but also sometimes meant Chinese or something else, and change the race on such documents to Negro. She kept a list of flagged names that she believed were suspect and should be checked for signs of African ancestry. Any request for a certificate of a person with a flagged name had to be held up for further research. The list included such names as Adams, Charles, Landry, and Olson. She explained how she could tell when someone's birth certificate was wrong at her dismissal hearing before the Civil Service Commission. "Very often we are acquainted with the name," Drake testified. "We know them to be the names of Negro families." She had her workers scour the obituaries of people who had died, looking for any clues that a dead person identified as white had black relatives or survivors, such as services at a traditionally black funeral home, relatives with traditionally black names, or burial at traditionally black cemeteries. Her research was instrumental in a decision by the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office in 1956 to obtain an indictment against a Plaquemines Parish woman on charges of filing a falsy document. The woman's crime: she considered herself white and had recorded that on the birth certificate for her child. The woman was eventually acquitted, but only after being asked a series of questions designed to attach to her any blackness at all, including whether her doctor treated her as a black person or a white person, and where her husband's sister's children attended school. When Drake was fired, few people were happier to see her go than Peter Hunter, father of 5. Hunter had tried to get birth certificates for his children, but Drake suspected Hunter's wife had African ancestry and so refused to release the certificates. After months of battling Drake unsuccessfully, Hunter finally put his children in parochial school. But what Hunter was most concerned about, according to his letter to city officials after Drake's dismissal, was not the burden of private school tuition or the denial of a public education, but that his family had been besmirched. "We find it difficult to understand how my wife's parents were registered as being white as were their parents," Hunter wrote. "And after being brought up that way, after all these years, someone that does not even know the family at all has reason to believe differently and would cause this much embarrassment."
A global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Where are Louisiana's race flagging files? The Louisiana Supreme Court proclaimed traceability of African ancestry to be the only requirement for definition of colored. In 1949, Naomi Drake assumed the post of Supervisor and Deputy Registrar of Vital Statistics at the Louisiana Bureau of Vital Statistics, and she figures prominently in the cases filed against the Bureau through the mid-1960s. Armed with the traceability criterion established by the court in 1938, she followed the practice of race flagging, pulling out a birth certificate that lists a baby as white but bears a name common to blacks. Such birth certificates are checked against a race list, maintained by the Vital Records Office. If the name appears on the race list, then a further study of genealogical records maintained by the Vital Records Office is conducted, a description given to the New Orleans States item, June 5 to 16, 1978, by a Dr. Doris Thompson who had been Assistant Secretary of the State Department of Health and Human Resources, of which the Bureau is a part. If the Bureau determined through study of its genealogical records that the person in question had any African ancestors, the applicant was then informed that a certificate would be issued only if it declared the person to be colored. If the applicant refused to accept such a certificate, the Bureau in turn refused to issue a certificate. There is evidence that between 1960 and 1965 a minimum of 4,700 applications for certificated copies of birth certificates and a minimum of 1,100 applications for death certificates were held in abeyance by the Bureau under the supervision of Naomi Drake, 188 so. Second 94. Individuals petitioned the courts to force the Bureau to change the racial labels that appeared on the birth or death certificates of members of their families. They presented evidence that purported to prove that these people were white despite the imputations of Bureau genealogists. In each case, the Bureau questioned the authenticity of much of the evidence adduced, or the nature of the evidence introduced during the proceedings. Plaintiff's job was to dispute the authenticity of the documents, prove that he was the child of a different marriage or of a sexual union resulting from a parent's remarriage or concubinage, or dispute the meaning of the specific social label that in the eyes of the Bureau implied Negro ancestry. Page 44. Why aren't these victims of Louisiana's racist purity laws as well known as the victims of the Nuremberg laws? Moreover, why was this practice continued long after both the federal government, including the U.S. Supreme Court, which had refused to hear Mrs. Phipps's case, and Louisiana state government had officially overturned the Jim Crow racial segregation laws and pledged themselves to promoting a society of racial equality? The fact is, however, that the practice of race flagging and withholding certificates continued long after Naomi Drake's departure from her post. We have no way of estimating the number of applications for birth or death certificates withheld since the mid-60s. This information is now considered confidential and is carefully guarded by clerks and bureaucrats, but other indices are telling. 12 mandamus proceedings against the Bureau have been initiated since Drake's official departure. Also on May 26, 1977, Wayne Parker, at the time Registrar of Vital Statistics, admitted to me in an interview that in 1977 the Bureau employed 2 full-time clerk investigators to handle only cases concerned with racial designation, and that the Bureau spent some 6,000 man-hours in 1976 exclusively on race cases. Parker estimated that between 60 and 100 surnames were regularly flagged by the Bureau and checked in a special file room against fairly extensive genealogies kept by the Bureau on the many branches of these families. Thompson C.F. New Orleans States item, June 5 to 16, 1978, estimated that 250 names of white families with partially black ancestry were kept at the Bureau. Page 49. It should be pointed out that one does not actually have to have any African ancestry in order to be a victim of race flagging. Few Americans know, for example, that words such as colored or mulatto were often used as synonyms for non-white and often included people with no African ancestry at all. Especially problematic is the use of the term mulatto. As the Louisiana Court of Appeals acknowledged in rendering its judgment, U.S. censuses did not provide many alternatives for racial identification. This meant that the term mulatto was often applied loosely. The late 19th century census records allowed only 5 options: white, black, mulatto, Chinese, or Indian. Limited lexical options meant that the term mulatto was used to denote anyone who did not appear all white or all black. Page 49. Again, why has the American Civil Liberties and other organizations supposedly concerned with privacy and civil liberties shown no interest whatsoever in demanding that Louisiana reveal the location of these files, explain why they are keeping them and how they are used? How are Louisiana genealogical files any more legitimate than the FBI's COINTELPRO files on political dissidents? I would say that the Louisiana race flagging files are even less legitimate, since the only crime its victims were suspected of was having the wrong ancestors. I strongly suspect that the strange silence of the ACLU and other supposed defenders of liberty and rights has a lot to do with the fact that the American black intelligentsia is overwhelming in favor of promoting a one-drop myth of blackness and eagerly engages in character assassination against mixed whites they accuse of passing for who they really are.
A global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Mixed race, there's no such thing as mixed race. I included racial classification confusion in the title of the segment. I believe that with the hashtag as well in the promotions. There is no such thing as mixed race. There's no such thing biologically as white, black, or when I'm talking about that before, it's just going to be arbitrary. Whatever the most powerful white people, the flagger, Naomi Drake, whatever they decide, that's what it will be. All of it is made up. There's only one race, that is the white race. That confusion is very common. Black race, mixed race, and on and on and on. There's one race and there's only one reason to belong to a race, that is to practice white supremacy, racism. And even the notion of so-called mixed race, it reifies the notion that there is a so-called white race, as though there is a pure white race and a pure black race. All of that is nonsense and hogwash to the fullest, and it just helps promote confusion about white supremacy, racism.
And so that's what I came up with many years ago. And even though I talk to people who are college professors sometimes, and that run right past them. I mean, they brush right past it. And it's almost amazing. I say, wait a minute, these are words that are very important. Sir, ma'am, racism is white supremacy. White supremacy is racism. These are not words just thrown around just any kind of old way. These are very important words. It has to do with the existence of everybody on this planet, every minute of the existence of everybody on this planet. You have to have definition.
We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but, O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet, and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the
over my false dreams that I once knew. Wondering why my dreams never came true. Something is holding me back. Is it because I'm black? 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 Is it because I'm black?
Reflection, brown skin complexion, brown Crayola color spectrum, black subjected. My adolescence filled with questions. We wear the mask that designates rejection. Paul, Laurence, Dunbar confessions. Justified effervescence, tribulations, trials, or lessons. Injustice make the youngins restless. Incorrectness, masquerade as correctness. The question is who and what is the most perplexing. The answer, copper-colored, black subjected. Our quest is for logic to be manifested. Color confrontation overload, Dr. Francis Cresswell's. The message, race is a mass destructive weapon. Reflection, brown skin complexion, brown Crayola color spectrum. Black subjected, black subjected.
Is it because I'm black? 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 Is it because I'm black?
Threat inbound to immediate shelter. This is not a drill.
Esto es una emergencia.
JGH notification message. This station has interrupted its regular program at the request of During this emergency, most stations will remain on providing news and information to the public in a time area.
Today it's time to stop singing and start swinging.
All broadcast cable system shall transmit its emergency action notification message.
We're coming to get our check.
You are now listening to P.A.R. Just People Activity Radio. And I'm your host, JohnGHorse. Welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place. Is it because I'm black? P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program seeking to inform non-white people, in particular, black classified and assisted in counter-racist codification. The title of today's episode is Naomi Drake, the most feared woman in Louisiana. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program dedicated to creating less confusion for people subject to non-white and particular black classification. Less confusion with the ultimate goal of solving problems. Replace the system of racism, white supremacy with the system of justice. Immediately. JohnGHorse's Cash App is $JohnGHorse, capital G, capital H-O-R-S-E. Feel free to donate if you feel this program is constructive and worth your time.
Yes, indeed. Feel free to donate if you feel this program is constructive and worth your time. And again, this is your gracious and humble host, John G. Horse. And this is P.A.R. People Activity Radio. And we are going to stay on task, stay on code, and stay on par. Get this information to you. Get on up out of here so you can get back to surviving and navigating the onslaught of your specific environment. Hopefully, not a heavy environment or overweighing environment of racism, white supremacy. Let's get into this work. The title of today's episode is Naomi Drake, the most feared woman in Louisiana. Yes, indeed. And I thought this subject was apropos because we got a lot of confusion going on around here, and I always find it constructive to create content emphasizing that this thing here that we are subject to, this global system of racism, white supremacy, is an arbitrary social construct created by the dominant society who have classified themselves as the blue blood elite class, and that class is white classification. And all those who are non-white are mishmash and should get their helmet and shoulder pads ready because they're going to get bopped upside the head with a whole bunch of injustice and mistreatment, especially those people who are subject to non-white black classification. That's the bottom of the barrel. That's the can that gets kicked around by most people on the planet. If you find yourself subject to black classification, like old Big Bill Broomsy said, get back, get back, get back. You understand me? Because there's finna be some mistreatment coming across your head like a baseball bat. Now that's either true or it's not true in all areas of people activity. But back to the topic, Naomi Ruth Mason Drake. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Baby. Naomi Drake's reign of terror as a Louisiana state government official was from 1949 to 1965, and she put in some work. You understand me? And it wasn't black folks who caught the most hell from her. It was white folks who she suspected as passing with some non-white lineage up in that genealogy. And see, this is the insane nature of the system of racism, white supremacy. It really doesn't exist. But in order to maintain a non-existent social construct, I mean, you just make these things up as you go along. Originally, there was this thing called a one-drop rule that was created in Virginia to preserve the white race for whatever reason, you understand me? And that piece of legislation in Virginia, it was like the best thing since French toast to the United States colonies, because everybody took that thing and started making things up as they went along, and in the state of Louisiana, she's one-drop rule, it was very difficult to, well, first of all, one drop of what? Black blood? What's black blood? What's black? What's white? What is all this mess that we use in our vernacular and in society? Is make believe, enforced, militarily backed, and enforced by the government of the United States and around the globe, by countries, global governments, enforce their version of racism, white supremacy, codification, which may differ a little, but the thing that remains the same is those who classify themselves as white are on the top of society with all the access, resources, and benefits of society, and those who are classified as black are always at the bottom getting kicked around like a can. But back to the subject at hand, because I promised to get in here and get up out of here, because I know y'all got things to do just like me. Naomi Drake, the most feared woman in Louisiana, 1949 to 1965. Naomi Drake was an American who became notable in the mid-20th century Louisiana as the registrar of the Bureau of Vital Statistics for the city of New Orleans, 1949 to 1965, where she imposed strict racial classifications on people under a binary system that recognized only white and black, whatever that means, or all other. She unilaterally changed records to classify mixed race, whatever that means, individuals as black if she found they had any black or African ancestry, and application of hypodescendant rules. Goodness, making stuff up as they go along. I'm sorry. An application of hypodescendant rules and did not notify people of her actions. So she just was doing what she wanted to do. You understand me? As per her white classification, anything goes. In other cases, if people would not accept her racial classification, she refused to release the requested birth or death certificate. Her insistence on changing records to classify persons of any subjected African descent was similar to the racial zealotry. Goodness gracious, what are these words? The racial zealotry, Z-E-A-L-O-T-R-Y, demonstrated by Dr. Walter Plecker, State Registrar of Virginia's Vital Statistics and the major lobbyist for its Racial Integrity Act of 1954. Please, fellow black classifiers, research the Racial Integrity Act. And Naomi Drake was a state registrar, I believe, just like Dr. Walter Plecker, stomped down white supremacists of Virginia. I mean, research him, Dr. Walter Plecker. Stomp down. We'll get into Walter Plecker, too. Matter of fact, I'm going to have to do one on him right after this one. But let's move on. In 1938, in Sunbury verse, I'm sorry, fellow black classifiers, I'm sorry, these names killing me. These names are killing me. But in 1938, in Sunsiri versus Kasanji, affirmed on rehearing in 1940, the Louisiana Supreme Court proclaimed traceability of African ancestry to be the only requirement for definition of color. Drake, with the office, and again, making stuff up as they go along, you understand me. Drake began the office as deputy and eventually became director. She directed race flagging. She would track birth certificates that bore surnames common to blacks. If the baby was listed as white, she directed workers to check the certificate against a race list maintained by the Vital Records Office. If the name appeared on the race list, the Vital Records Office conducted a further study of its genealogical records to reach its own assessment of the race of the individual and family. Now, see, race list meaning a list of blacks. What else are we talking about? The race list was a list of blacks. Now, that's either true or it's not true. And your name is similar to a name that blacks, I guess, had in the state of Louisiana. As a white person, you were subject to deeper auditing of your genealogy. This is crazy to me. I mean, let's move on. Let's move on. All jokes aside, Naomi Drake was a stomped down race soldier for the religion of racism, white supremacy. She was a high priestess. She took her job seriously. She sat and burned midnight oil, flagging and searching with veracity if somebody had an ancestor that on paper was non-white. Remarkable. I mean, this stuff is remarkable. The system is awesome, but the individuals that take the lead of what it means to be white, like Naomi Drake, Dr. Walter Plecker, I hope I ain't miss saying his name. Yeah, Dr. Walter Plecker. Man, these cats are worth picking up a book and actually studying the stuff that they created. I mean, because we're still dealing with the residue of all that make-believe, arbitrary, social construct, racial classification, confusion that they took their life energy to maintain, refine, and codify. Now, that's either true or it's not true. And Naomi Drake, in this particular instance, was so steadfast in maintaining racism, white supremacy, white people around her wanted to get her up out of the office. And ultimately, I believe she resigned after being investigated by her white colleagues. That's how steadfast Naomi Drake was about stomping down on anybody who was classified in black. And if you had a doggone cousin or uncle or great-great-great-grandmama that was non-white or had a C or anything that wasn't W on that certificate, you out the white club. Absolutely incredible. And to make a long story short, among the practices of Drake directed was having her workers check obituaries. They were to assess whether the obituary of a person identified as white provided clues that might help show the individual was really black, such as having black relatives, services at a traditionally black funeral home, or burial at a traditionally black cemetery. Evidence which she would use to ensure the death certificate classified the person as black from the cradle to the grave. Fellow black classified from the cradle to the grave. The tenacity of which Naomi Drake went about practicing racism, white supremacy, stomping down on people who she classified as non-white and or black. She was hard body. Worth the time to document and create the content on. We're not going to sit here all day. Race is racism. Racism is white supremacy. Under the system of racism, white supremacy, there is only one race. Race does not exist, but those people who classify themselves as white says it does. And they dominate all people who they say are not white. Now that's either true or it's not true. Naomi Drake, race soldier of the religion of racism, white supremacy. And I hope I have contributed to less confusion. And always remember, keep learning and stay codified.
Is it because I'm black? Is it because I'm black? Is it because I'm black? Is it because I'm black?
We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but, oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet, and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask.
Looking back over my false dreams that I once knew, wondering why my dreams never came true. Something is holding me back. Is it because I'm black? 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 Is it because I'm black?
Reflection, brown skin complexion, brown Crayola color spectrum, black subjected. My adolescence filled with questions. We wear the mask that designates rejection. Paul, Laurence, Dunbar confessions. Justified effervescence, tribulations, trials, or lessons. Injustice make the youngins restless. Incorrectness masquerade as correctness. The question is who and what is the most perplexing. The answer, copper-colored, black subjected. Our quest is for logic to be manifested. Color confrontation overload, Dr. Francis Cresswell's. The message, race is a mass destructive weapon. Reflection, brown skin complexion, brown Crayola color spectrum. Black subjected.
Is it because I'm black? 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 Is it because I'm black?
because I'm black.